Once, our life with Michael seemed perfect. A cozy house in the suburbs of London, stable jobs, a strong marriage. But in recent months, everything has changed. Michael has been growing more distant, and our arguments over his inability to have children have become almost routine. Each argument left us both feeling more and more distant from each other. Today, he left for another business trip. Usually, before leaving, Michael would at least try to take care of some household chores. But this time, he didn't even bother to fix the broken refrigerator, despite promising to do so a week ago. We barely exchanged a few words over breakfast. I watched him pack his suitcase, and a thought kept running through my mind. When did we stop being close? When the door closed behind him, I was left alone in an empty house, and the silence was deafening. It was a strange feeling. The house that was once filled with laughter and conversations had now become a symbol of our growing estrangement. Michael rarely responds to my messages, and even when he does, his replies are short and cold, as if out of obligation. Each time I receive one of his messages, I feel another crack forming between us. I knew that our problems couldn't be solved with just a conversation, but I couldn't bring myself to admit that our marriage might already be beyond saving. Alone in this house, which once felt cozy and secure, I realized just how truly lonely I am. Jake, my stepbrother, came over today to finally fix the refrigerator. We've always gotten along well, but there has always been an unspoken attraction between us that we both tried to ignore. Today was no different. He entered the house with that confident smile, something I always found both comforting and irresistibly attractive. Jake got to work, and soon his shirt was draped over the back of a chair, the heat and effort forcing him to work in just his jeans. I tried to keep myself busy in another room, but I couldn't resist sneaking glances at him from around the corner. His muscular body glistened with sweat, and with every movement he made, a wave of excitement surged through me. I tried to fight this feeling, but it only grew stronger. Finally, I gave in to the overwhelming desire. I hid behind the corner, unable to stop myself, and slowly placed my hand between my legs. At first, it was just a light touch, but soon I began to rub harder, feeling a dizzying sensation take over me. I bit my lip, trying not to make a sound, watching Jake as he focused entirely on fixing the refrigerator. He noticed nothing, and that only heightened my excitement. When my fingers became wet, I couldn't resist any longer. I licked them, closing my eyes and imagining it was Jake. My head spun from this forbidden pleasure, but I knew I had to stop before he noticed anything. Jake continued working, oblivious to everything, while I tried to compose myself, realizing that I had just crossed all imaginable boundaries. When Jake finished repairing the refrigerator, he wiped the sweat from his brow and turned to me with that same confidence I had always noticed in his eyes. We talked about trivial things, but there was something deeper in the air, something we both tried to ignore. I hadn't fully calmed down after what had happened around the corner, and I could still feel my body responding to the secret desires I had just satisfied. Suddenly, Jake interrupted our conversation, looking at me intently. "Are you happy with Michael?" The question, asked in the sudden silence, caught me off guard. I felt something shift inside me, as if someone had suddenly torn away the mask I had been wearing for so long. My mind froze for a moment, and I realized that deep down, I had known the answer to that question for a long time. But I was afraid to admit it. I couldn't answer right away. Instead, I felt the wetness and excitement I had experienced earlier rising to the surface again. Jake took a step closer, and the tension between us became so palpable it felt like it would soon tear the air apart. Before I could find the words to respond, our eyes met, and I realized that no answer was needed. Everything I felt, all my suppressed desires and fears, flared up in a single moment as our lips met. This kiss wasn't just passionate. It was an explosion of everything we had both been hiding for too long. In that moment, I knew that this kiss would change everything. We could no longer pretend that there was nothing between us. Our relationship would never be the same again. After that first kiss, something between Jake and me changed irrevocably. The passion that had always smoldered between us suddenly flared up with such intensity that there was no point in trying to suppress it anymore. We both knew we were treading dangerous ground, but that only fueled our desire. We sought every opportunity to be alone, often risking being caught. And the strangest part was that we were step-siblings, which only added more forbidden fire to our romance. Our encounters became increasingly unexpected and passionate. We couldn't keep our hands off each other. One evening, just after I closed the door behind Jake, he pressed me against the wall in the hallway, his hands exploring my body as if he feared I might disappear. I responded with equal fervor, my fingers tangling in his hair, and before I knew it, he had lifted me onto the washing machine. My legs wrapped around his waist, and we both lost ourselves in a whirlwind of kisses and touches that only heightened our desire. Every touch became bolder and more confident. Another time, when Jake came over to check on the refrigerator, we barely made it to the kitchen. He sat me on the table, instantly stripping off my clothes, and whispered with a grin, "Soon, you'll need not just a plumber, but a carpenter too." His words made me laugh, but the laughter quickly turned into a moan as he trailed his hot lips down my neck. Our encounters were filled with novelty and risk. We explored new positions and moments, discovering each other anew every time. Once I stood with my back against the wall, and he wrapped my leg around his waist, his hands gripping my hips firmly, while his lips hovered just inches from mine. Another time, we made love right on the kitchen floor, our bodies intertwined in a single, unstoppable surge of passion. And every time I looked at him, I couldn't shake the thought that he was my stepbrother, which only added more fire to our connection. But with each time we found ourselves together again, I began to think more about what we were doing. What once seemed like just passion now started to take on darker shades. I couldn't help but think that our connection was deeply wrong. Yes, it made it even more thrilling. But now I was beginning to see the darker side of this story. I was afraid of what would come next and how far we might go. As time went on, I began to understand that our connection went far beyond mere physical passion. It wasn't just attraction, it was something more. Jake felt it too. We started talking, sharing our thoughts and feelings, and these candid confessions only deepened our attraction to each other. But with each confession, I became more aware of just how dangerous this situation was. We both knew that this was becoming something inevitable, that we couldn't stop even if we wanted to. Our passion became our chains, binding us tighter with each passing day. And the more we gave into it, the more I realized I was losing myself in this storm of emotions. And now, when I was alone, I couldn't shake the thoughts that our actions might bring consequences that neither of us could foresee. Michael returned home unexpectedly early. I had no time to prepare, neither mentally nor physically. From the moment he walked in, I could sense something was wrong. His gaze was cold, and there was a tension between us, something invisible yet palpable. He didn't unpack his suitcase, didn't hug me as he usually did. Instead, he went straight to his computer. "Sarah, is there something you want to tell me?" His voice was quiet, but it was filled with barely restrained anger. I felt everything inside me freeze. Could he have found out? I couldn't utter a word, just stood there gripping the edge of the table as if it were a lifeline. Michael turned the laptop screen toward me, and my heart stopped. On the screen was footage from the security camera. The camera we had installed after the neighbor's house had been targeted by burglars. The camera I had completely forgotten about. The recording showed Jake and me in the most intimate moments I never wanted to see, replayed. I felt the blood drain from my face, and for a moment I thought I might faint. You were spying on me?" I whispered, unable to believe this was really happening. "Spying on you?" Michael laughed, but there was no joy in his laughter. I just wanted to make sure our home was safe. Instead, I find out my wife is sleeping with her own stepbrother. I didn't know what to say. The words were stuck in my throat. I felt guilt and shame swelling inside me. But what struck me the most was Michael's reaction. His face was twisted in anger, and I had never seen him like this. "I thought our marriage meant something to you." His voice sounded as though he was holding back tears. "But you've destroyed everything. I can't stay in this house another minute." He packed his things with cold, almost mechanical precision. I tried to stop him, begged him to listen, to let me explain, but all my words were in vain. Michael was resolute. His decision was final. Before leaving, he stopped at the door and gave me one last look. In his eyes, I saw nothing but pain and disappointment. "I'm leaving," he said before slamming the door. "Don't try to find me." When he was gone, the house felt even emptier and more oppressive than ever before. I was left alone with my guilt, tearing me apart from the inside. I realized that I had destroyed not only my marriage, but also myself. And only later, when I was alone, did I begin to realize that the situation might not be as clear-cut as it seemed. I remembered how Michael had rarely responded to my messages, how he had often been mysteriously silent and secretive. And then a thought crossed my mind. What if he knew more than he let on? What if his accidental discovery of the recording wasn't an accident at all? After Michael left, I sank into a state that could only be described as emptiness. The life that once seemed so stable suddenly fell apart. I realized that I had destroyed my marriage, and the guilt was unbearable. Everything I did felt like it was happening through a thick fog. I could no longer find joy in anything. Not in my work, not in socializing with friends, not even in the simplest things that used to bring me pleasure. Every day felt the same. I almost stopped leaving the house, sinking deeper into my thoughts and self-blame. Soon, I realized I had to stop communicating with Jake. I could no longer allow myself to indulge in these feelings, which only complicated my life further. Our connection, once so passionate and desirable, was now a source of pain and disappointment. I knew that if I didn't stop, it would lead me to even greater losses. Michael, though he had left, still lingered in my life. We communicated only out of necessity, discussing formalities through dry, almost lifeless messages. Every time I received a message from him, I felt a wall of unspoken words and hurt growing between us. I knew he would never be able to forgive me, and perhaps I would never be able to forgive myself. But one question kept gnawing at me. I kept thinking about what Michael had said before he left, about those recordings he showed me. With each passing thought, I felt more and more that something didn't add up. Why was he so sure that the recording contained proof of my infidelity? Something in his words felt false. And so, one day, I decided to watch those security camera recordings again. As I turned on the laptop, I watched the footage with a mix of dread and curiosity. But the longer I watched, the more I realized the recordings didn't show anything that could accuse me of infidelity. I didn't see a single compromising moment between Jake and me that Michael supposedly saw. My heart began to race. Michael had lied. He had deliberately twisted the truth to accuse me. Suddenly, it hit me. He couldn't have seen this on the cameras because there was nothing there to see. But then how did he know? A suspicion began to grow within me that someone had told him. Someone who knew about our affair and decided to use it against me. This realization hit me like an avalanche. I had destroyed my marriage, but perhaps I wasn't the only one who had played a role in that destruction. And now I was left alone, not just with the guilt, but with the deep pain of betrayal, realizing that my entire life was far more complex and darker than I could have imagined. After realizing that Michael couldn't have seen our affair with Jake on the cameras, I started to suspect what might have driven his accusations. The suspicion that someone had informed him about our relationship kept gnawing at me. But with each passing day, another feeling grew stronger. The feeling that Michael himself was hiding something significant. His coldness, the rare responses to my messages, the frequent business trips, all of it suddenly took on a new meaning. One day, while tidying up the house, I came across Michael's laptop, which he had forgotten to take with him when he left. In that moment, something inside me tightened. I remembered how, back when we were still living together, I had accidentally overheard him typing in his password. That moment had seemed so insignificant at the time, but now I realized I could use that knowledge to get the answers I needed. My hand trembled as I entered the password, but I knew I had to find out the truth, no matter what it was. I didn't expect to see what I found. At first, it was just conversations, long, intimate exchanges with a woman I had never known. The more I read, the more I realized that their relationship had been going on for a long time. Michael wasn't just flirting with her. It was something more. His words were full of warmth, affection, and even love. He shared with her the very feelings I had been seeking in our relationship but had never found. Each word in those messages felt like a blow. I felt a wave of anger and disappointment rising inside me. Michael, my husband, had been deceiving me all these years, while I, like a naive fool, had been trying to save something that was already broken. Now everything made sense. His distance, his lack of interest in me, the strange business trips. It was all part of his double life. But what shocked me the most was the cold and cruel logic with which he had tried to shift the blame onto me. It was clear from his correspondence that he had used my affair with Jake as an excuse to finally destroy our marriage while hiding his own infidelities. Michael wanted to make me feel guilty when, in reality, he was the one who was guilty. The shock of this discovery knocked the ground out from under me. All my previous feelings for Michael, love, guilt, fear, were instantly replaced by a cold, clear realization. I had to leave it all behind. Michael had betrayed me long ago, and I could no longer allow him to manipulate me. This discovery became a turning point in my life. I could no longer remain a victim. Now I knew the truth, and it gave me the strength to move forward. and although the pain of betrayal didn't disappear, I felt that from this moment on, I could live my life free from the chains that Michael had tried to put on me for so long. After discovering the truth about Michael's infidelity, my perception of the world drastically changed. My entire life was entangled in lies and betrayal, and I could no longer trust anyone. But the trials didn't end there. Each day, I began to notice more and more oddities in Jake's behavior. At first, it was small things. His unexpected questions about Michael's financial situation, strange remarks about how easy it would be to start over. Jake seemed more insistent and interested in matters that had never concerned him before. This made me uneasy, but I chalked it up to his desire to be close and help me through a difficult time. However, I soon realized that things weren't so simple. One day, while Jake was at my house, he left his phone on the kitchen table. When he stepped out of the room, a message popped up on the screen. The name of the sender shocked me. It was Lisa, my best friend. I couldn't resist the temptation and read the message. In it, Lisa wrote to Jake, "When are you finally going to finish the job? We've been planning this for too long." How was Lisa connected to Jake? And what were they planning? I couldn't believe that my best friend could be part of some scheme. But the more I thought about it, the more everything began to make sense. Lisa had always been there, supporting me, knowing all my weaknesses. But what if she had been playing her own game all along? I decided to conduct my own investigation. I began searching through Jake's phone for more messages from Lisa and other hints of their connection. The deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became. It turned out that Jake and Lisa had been planning to destroy my marriage for a long time. Their goal was simple: to have Lisa marry Michael. After that, through legal manipulations and schemes, they planned to take all of Michael's assets and divide them between themselves. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. I realized that Lisa was the very woman Michael had been cheating on me with. Jake and Lisa were playing a double game, using both of us to achieve their goals. They were willing to do anything, even destroy our lives, to get what they wanted. I felt a surge of rage and disgust inside me. I had trusted Lisa, considered her my friend, and Jake my ally. But it turned out they were just puppets in their own game, destroying everything in their path. My decision was made. I wouldn't let them destroy my life. This moment became a turning point. I could no longer remain a victim. Now I knew who my real enemies were, and I was ready to fight for my life and my future. I decided not to let them use me any further. It was time to take control and break the chain of lies and manipulations that had bound me. When I learned the truth about Jake and Lisa, all the pieces of the puzzle that once seemed scattered suddenly began to come together. Michael, Jake, Lisa, they were all connected in a complex web of deceit and betrayal. But I wasn't going to let them win. This time, the unraveling would be different. I decided that since they had played me, I could play my own game too. First, I began carefully gathering evidence. I took screenshots of Jake and Lisa's conversations, saving all the important details of their plans. But I knew that this alone wouldn't be enough. I decided to proceed cautiously, without revealing that I knew the truth. I started by inviting Lisa over for a friendly dinner to discuss the situation. I knew she wouldn't be able to resist the opportunity to find out more about how I was coping with the divorce. Lisa arrived, as always, with a sweet smile on her face. But I could already see through her. As we sat at the table, I gradually steered the conversation toward Michael. She talked about how she was supporting me during this difficult time, how concerned she was for me. But in her eyes I saw satisfaction. She thought their plan was working. Finally, as the dinner was coming to an end, I looked at her and said, "Lisa, do you know that I sometimes have strange dreams? In one of them, you and Michael were together, and Jake was there too." Her expression changed slightly, but she quickly composed herself. "Sarah, they're just dreams. You're going through a tough time," she replied with feigned sympathy. But I wasn't going to stop. "You know, Lisa, in these dreams, Jake and you were plotting together. And then everything fell apart when I found out the truth." I looked straight into her eyes, and for the first time I noticed her getting nervous. She tried to change the subject, but I already knew I had hit the mark. After that dinner, I realized it was time. I decided to act directly. The next day, I went to Michael's office. I knew Lisa often visited him there under the pretext of business meetings. When I walked into his office, he was surprised but not scared. He must not have known that I had figured it all out. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" he asked, looking up from his papers. I walked up to him and laid out the printed screenshots of Lisa and Jake's conversations. "Michael, I know everything," I said. He paled. His reaction was immediate. He grabbed the papers and began to study them. But I already knew he wouldn't be able to explain why his love and my stepbrother were plotting behind his back. "You thought I wouldn't find out?" I asked. Then added, "You were so busy with your own affairs that you didn't notice how you were being deceived." Michael was cornered, and I saw fear beginning to form in his eyes. He realized that I now knew the truth, and that Lisa and Jake had been using him for their own purposes. "What are you going to do?" he finally asked, finding his voice. "I'm going to make sure they get what they deserve. And you won't be left out either. Did you think I'd let you destroy my life and walk away unscathed?" I could see Michael trying to justify himself, but I didn't want to hear his excuses. Meanwhile, I knew that Lisa and Jake were likely beginning to suspect that their plan had been uncovered. But I had one ace up my sleeve. I knew that Lisa kept all her important documents in one of the safes at Michael's country house, and that Jake often met her there when Michael wasn't home. I decided to use this against them. That evening, I returned to Michael's country house. There, I found the very safe that Lisa thought no one would touch. With the information I had obtained from Michael, I managed to open it. Inside, I found numerous documents that confirmed her plans regarding Michael's assets. I also found copies of property documents that she intended to transfer to her name through a sham marriage. I gathered all of these documents and sent them to a lawyer I had contacted in advance. The next day, I sent copies of the documents to Jake and Lisa, so they would know that their plan was destroyed. Their reaction was immediate. Lisa tried to call me, but I didn't answer. Jake came to my house trying to explain, but I didn't listen. I told him that they were now facing a legal battle and that I would no longer allow them to play with me. That day was a true liberation for me. I was able to free myself from the chains of lies and betrayal that had bound me for so long. Now I knew I was ready to start a new life, leaving the past behind. After everything that had happened, I realized that I could no longer continue living in this cycle of deceit and betrayal. It was time to leave this toxic situation behind. I made the decision to cut ties with all of them, Michael, Jake, and Lisa. They could no longer be a part of my life if I wanted to move forward. Each of them had played a role in the destruction of my life. But I also realized that I bore responsibility for everything that had happened. My infidelity and problems in my marriage were merely symptoms of deeper personal issues that I had long ignored. I understood that I couldn't change my future if I didn't start working on myself. I began by signing up for therapy. Talking with a therapist helped me see that my decisions and actions were the result of insecurities and a fear of being alone. I realized that for many years, I had sought comfort and support in others instead of building a healthy relationship with myself. Therapy was not an easy process, but it gave me the opportunity to rethink my life. I started finding joy in simple things: reading books, walking in nature, engaging in activities I had previously postponed. I began reconnecting with friends and family who had been neglected in the whirlwind of problems and anxieties. One of the hardest decisions was how to handle things with our parents. Jake and I agreed that they should never know the truth about what had happened between us. We understood that revealing these events would bring no good and would only break their hearts. After all, they had always seen us not just as step-siblings, but as those who could support each other. We agreed to keep everything a secret, sparing them from this painful truth. I also decided to change my environment. I moved to another city where no one knew about my past. This gave me the chance to start fresh, without old memories and associations. In this new place, I found a job that brought me joy, and I began building a new life from scratch. The past, of course, didn't disappear, but I no longer allowed it to control my life. I became stronger and wiser because of what I had gone through. Now I knew that I could handle any challenges if I believed in myself and followed my own principles. With each passing day, I felt my inner strength returning. I was ready for a new chapter in life, free from old ties and manipulations. This was my new start, a life where I no longer allowed anyone to play with me, where I was the true master of my destiny.